By 2017, Craig Wright had turned the spotlight into a weapon. He no longer tried to convince the crypto community through proofs or code. Instead, he started using corporate structures, patent filings, and courtrooms. His partnership with Calvin Ayre provided deep pockets, legal muscle, and public platforms. Together, they cultivated a media and business ecosystem designed to legitimize Wright's identity, not through consensus, but through ownership claims and institutional recognition. It started with N-Chain. The London-based company listed hundreds of blockchain-related patents, some bearing Wright's name as the inventor. Many describe mechanisms already known in Bitcoin, like digital signature systems or decentralized records. Legal experts debated whether they'd ever stand up to scrutiny, but the sheer volume sent a signal. Wright wasn't backing down. He was building an empire around Bitcoin's original vision. Publicly, he began insisting that Bitcoin had been corrupted, that the version maintained by open-source developers no longer represented Satoshi's intent. He framed himself as defending what Bitcoin was meant to be. This ideological divide crystallized during the scaling wars of 2017. The argument centered on a technical issue that had split the community for years: block size. Should Bitcoin's blocks remain capped at 1 megabyte, preserving decentralization but limiting transaction throughput? Or should the limit be raised to allow faster, cheaper transactions? Wright and Ayre championed the latter, arguing that small blocks strangled Bitcoin's potential as a global cash system. On the other side stood the Bitcoin Core developers, who prioritized stability and security. When a faction split to create Bitcoin Cash, BCH, in August 2017, Wright aligned with it enthusiastically. To him, BCH captured Satoshi's real design: peer-to-peer electronic cash, unburdened by what he called blockstream politics. Within months, though, even that alliance fractured. Wright clashed with other Bitcoin Cash leaders, including Roger Ver and developer Amaury Séchet, over further scaling and governance. The disagreements weren't merely technical, they were about philosophy, power, and ego. Wright publicly accused Ver of betraying Satoshi's vision and declared that he, Craig Wright, was the only one who truly understood the original protocol. By late 2018, those tensions boiled over into open conflict. A new fork of Bitcoin Cash emerged, championed by Wright and Ayre. They named it Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, Bitcoin SV. Its stated purpose was to restore Bitcoin to its 2009 rule set, with vastly larger block sizes and minimal developer intervention. In practice, it was a rival cryptocurrency bound to Wright's identity. He pitched it as Satoshi's Bitcoin, frequently declaring that Bitcoin SV was the real Bitcoin, and that BTC and BCH were illegal transformations. Exchanges, developers, and miners were forced to choose sides. The split turned ugly. On Twitter and at conferences, Wright labeled his critics frauds and criminals. He claimed Bitcoin SV would meet global enterprise standards and eventually replace all other versions. Exchanges like Binance and Kraken delisted the coin after escalating threats between communities. When Binance CEO Changpeng Zhao tweeted that Wright was not Satoshi and called him a fraud, Wright's response wasn't to refute him technically, it was to sue. That moment marked the birth of his legal campaign. Between 2019 and 2024, Wright filed dozens of lawsuits across multiple jurisdictions, targeting journalists, developers, and rival entrepreneurs for defamation and intellectual property infringement. He argued that any public claim that he wasn't Satoshi damaged his reputation and his company's. Many defendants saw the cases as strategic intimidation. Chilling effects meant to silence criticism. But each lawsuit, success or failure, reinforced Wright's image as relentless and unyielding. One of the earliest and most consequential cases emerged in Florida. The estate of Dave Kleiman, Wright's former associate, sued him for billions in Bitcoin, alleging that Wright had defrauded Kleiman's family out of jointly mined coins and intellectual property. The suit introduced thousands of pages of emails, company records, and messages that painted a complicated picture of Wright's early activities. The court scrutinized his documentation closely. Many papers contained digital signatures and timestamps later shown to be inconsistent or modified. At one point, a forensic expert testified that documents purportedly from 2011 contained fonts not released until years later. That detail became emblematic of the broader problem around Wright's evidence. Throughout the trial, Wright maintained emotional testimony, at times breaking down on the stand. He accused adversaries of trying to destroy his legacy and insisted he'd transferred many of the early coins to trust structures for security reasons. The jury ultimately ruled that Wright had not been a partner in inventing Bitcoin with Kleiman, but did find him liable for a smaller sum related to business dealings under W&K Info Defense Research. For the public, the verdict didn't deliver clarity. It underscored the ambiguity that followed him everywhere. Those seeking a definitive creator or conman answer found neither. Parallel to the Kleiman case, Wright waged an aggressive copyright campaign in England, claiming ownership of the Bitcoin white paper and core database design. He argued that as Satoshi, he held literary and database rights to the material, and that operating websites hosting the white paper without authorization constituted infringement. Several developers and the non-profit Bitcoin Association were drawn into the dispute. Critics dismissed it as an attempt to rebrand his identity claim as an IP monopoly. Still, the strategy had consequences. Legal costs for small developers mounted, and the precedent, if any ruling favored him, could influence how open-source projects handled documentation rights. His legal barrage extended to public figures. He sued podcaster Peter McCormack for calling him a fraud, blogger Hodlonaut for mocking his claims on Twitter, and exchange operators who refused to list Bitcoin SV. Some cases concluded with symbolic damages or judicial criticism of Wright's inconsistent testimony. In the McCormack case, the judge ruled that Wright presented false evidence and reduced any damages to a token £1, describing his credibility as unimpressive. Yet Wright treated partial victories and procedural successes as vindication, proclaiming each as legal confirmation of his identity. Behind the spectacle, N-Chain continued its operations. The company collaborated with enterprises on private blockchain applications and maintained the patent pipeline. Wright presented at conferences positioning Bitcoin SV as the enterprise blockchain for governments and corporations. Support from Calvin Ayre's CoinGeek media network ensured constant coverage. Events showcased Wright discussing the law of Bitcoin, asserting that legal enforcement, not anonymity, was the future of digital currency. His vision reframed Bitcoin from a libertarian experiment into a tool for regulated commerce. It appealed to businesses but alienated almost everyone in the decentralized first community. The irony was that by institutionalizing his crusade, Wright hardened opposition even further. prominent Bitcoin developers rallied around open-source permissions and published joint defenses against his copyright claims. Academics dissected his court filings, identifying altered timestamps, inconsistent claims about cryptographic key management, and shifting narratives. Each inconsistency eroded public confidence, yet the lawsuits kept coming. For Eyre and Wright, even adversarial press coverage reinforced name recognition and positioned them as central players in the fight over Bitcoin's future. By 2023, Wright's identity claim was entangled with dozens of lawsuits, defamation actions against podcasters like Peter McCormack and Twitter users such as Hodlonaut, copyright disputes over the Bitcoin white paper, and the heavyweight clash with the Crypto Open Patent Alliance, or COPA. None of those proceedings brought him closer to technical validation. When British courts ordered him to either move or sign from early Satoshi addresses, he could not. Judges repeatedly noted the gap between narrative and proof, while Wright's filings leaned on storylines about offshore trusts, missing keys, and allegedly lost hardware. Legal experts called his tactics lawfare by exhaustion, less about truth than about silencing dissent. Still, he treated each procedural reprieve as confirmation, telling supporters that the courts have recognized Satoshi, even as rulings said the opposite. That same year, new court records revealed internal communications contradicting his earlier statements about document creation and partnerships. In community discussions, few doubted anymore that Wright's narrative contained major fabrications. Yet his ability to sustain the fight, fund legal strategies, and command headlines demonstrated remarkable endurance. For Calvin Ayre's media outlets, the ongoing battles offered a constant stream of content affirming the existence of a lawful Bitcoin resting on Bitcoin SV. The saga reached another critical juncture when the COPA, Crypto Open Patent Alliance, filed a case seeking a declaratory judgment that Craig Wright was not Satoshi Nakamoto. The proceedings drew together years of testimony, file analyses, and cryptographic evidence. For the first time, the question wasn't whether he could prove he was Satoshi, but whether a court could formally declare that he wasn't. The filings detailed alleged fabrications of key documents, including manipulated metadata and forged signatures. Whether or not the court would make a definitive statement, the overwhelming tone signaled skepticism. At the heart of all this remained Wright's unaltered conviction. Interviews and court transcripts revealed a man utterly certain of his role in history, dismissing technical counter-arguments as distractions. He told reporters that Bitcoin SV would outlast criticism just as early skeptics doubted Bitcoin itself. To supporters, he was a misunderstood genius backed by a vision of lawful digital commerce. To detractors, he was a litigant who'd replace code with legal threats. And in that contrast, empirical verification versus narrative assertion, the larger cultural battle of crypto played out. By the end of the decade, Craig Wright's campaign had achieved something paradoxical. It made his identity less plausible, but his presence permanent. Each legal defeat reinforced public disbelief, but kept his name attached to Bitcoin's mythology. Bitcoin SV, the offshoot he called Satoshi's vision, survived mostly on insider funding and loyalty, not user adoption. Technical leaders like Andreas Antonopoulos and Adam Back publicly called his proofs provably false, while developer Luke Dashja summarized the community's consensus. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary math. For them, the case was closed. Cryptography had spoken. Yet Wright's lawsuits and bravado ensured that even in refutation, his myth endured.